Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you.
Well, you know, even though Easter is over, and that is that, of course, Easter was last week, and that's the day that we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For the Christian, the truth of the matter is that Easter is never over. The celebration of the holiday is really what we do every Sunday that we get together to meet. We are celebrating the fact that we have a risen Lord. And you know, as I've been doing this series with you over the last couple months, talking about reward and punishment, and the idea that God has given humanity this amazing gift, and that is that God, when He made us, gave us the capacity to choose to serve Him. We weren't compelled to serve Him. He didn't make us do it by the sheer power of who He is, but instead, God gave us this aspect of free will, and that free will gives us the capacity of choosing to follow Him. And what we've been learning along the way is that as we choose to follow God, and as we choose to respond to Him, God has promised to give rewards to those who respond in a positive way. And we are learning also that there are consequences to those who don't respond positively to God and what He's offered to us. And so as we begun to look at that, we said that there really is a reward that begins in this life, but I wanted to begin the transition today on the week after our Easter celebration, our national celebration, and talk about the reward that God promises us when we transcend from this life into the next life. What happens to us? What are the rewards that God has promised to us after we die? And I thought it was most appropriate that we began today talking about the promise of our resurrection. Because the fact that Jesus rose again from the dead is exciting to us. It should be exciting to us. But what makes it even more exciting to us is because Jesus Christ is alive, our promise is that one day we will raise to life from the dead. That we will have our own resurrection. Now when that resurrection is going to be, I'm not going to talk about that issue about when it's going to be, but that it's going to be is absolutely sure. That's going to happen. And that is the promise really for the last 2,000 some years of the church that we have clung to, and that is that not only has Jesus risen again from the dead, but we will one day rise again from the dead. When we think about that, resurrection, what I want to talk with you about today is what is that going to look like? How will we be once we rise from the dead? What does the Bible say about that, about our resurrection? And what we learn from the Bible is that by understanding how Jesus rose from the dead, we can understand a lot about our resurrection from the dead. That is the sure and certain hope that we have as followers of Jesus Christ. So you have an insert there this morning, and I'm going to follow along as we talk about this aspect of reward that God has promised to those who respond in faith to Him. And we're talking about this morning about life in the resurrected body. That one day, doesn't matter when we've died or all the people who have died before us. Our friends from Africa have lost friends in the violence of the civil wars there and the genocides there. Other people in this room have lost family to illness and to accident and to tragedy or through death or through disease. But God has promised all of us that because of Jesus' resurrection, one day we too will rise again from the dead. And I'm pretty curious to know, What's that going to be like to be risen from the dead? So let's look at it this morning. And first of all, in Revelation 22:12, it says this: "Look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done." So we know that Jesus, as he returns, is going to bring his reward with him. And part of that reward is, the Bible tells us that the dead are going to rise. And we want to talk about what's going to happen to those who follow Jesus Christ today as they rise again in this resurrected body. What's it going to look like? How is that going to be for us? And so let's just jump right into it. The first thing that we know about the resurrected body is that it's going to be in the image of Christ. So if you look at Jesus and you understand how when Jesus rose from the dead, what he did, where he went, how he did it, that's going to tell us a lot about what our body is going to be like. We know that they killed Jesus, right? They beat him, they pierced his hands, they pierced his feet, they stabbed his side to make sure he was dead, and yet when he came back to life, we're told in 1 Corinthians 15:49 that just as we have borne the image of the earthly man, that is Adam, we all look somewhat like Adam, so shall we bear the image of the heavenly man. So we know that the image of Christ, who he is, what he was as he walked on the earth, that image is going to be impressed on us in some way. And so let's look some more at what that means about being in the image of Christ and living in a resurrected body. I just got out of being in a van, driving in a van for 600 miles with 8 children. I don't know about you, but after about age 40, driving in a van for more than about 10 miles is not fun anymore. Now, I want to say something. For those of you who are young parents, I love seeing you pull in the parking lot with your minivans full of children. I really do. I love seeing it, but I'm glad I'm not doing it, okay? Because the body, after a while, you know, you begin to, you think a lot more about eternity at that point. Well, what is that body going to be like? Luke chapter 20, verses 35 through 36 tells us that that body, that resurrected body, is going to be immortal. It's going to be immortal. And that is to say, it is never going to die. So the body that we have isn't going to die. It's not going to get sick. It's not going to succumb to disease. It's not going to be subject to the kinds of things that cause us decay in this life. Look what it says. But those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection of the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They can no longer die, for they are like the angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. Now, the first thing to understand about the resurrected body and this idea of it being immortal is to understand that when we are resurrected, we are not becoming angels. That's not the point of what he's saying here. He says, like angels. So, when people say, so-and-so died and they're my angel, they're not your angel, because angels were a created class of beings that are different from us. They function in both the material and immaterial world, the spiritual and the physical world, but we are not going to become angels. But there are a lot of characteristics in our lives that are going to resemble what angels are. But we're never going to become angels. God made us to be people. And so in the resurrection, we are still going to be people. We're not going to be angels, but we are going to be immortal. And that is, we're not going to grow old, we're not going to succumb to sickness, and we're not going to succumb to death. We will be immortal. And that leads us to the second idea. Actually, it's a point 3 here. And that is that we are going to be imperishable. Imperishable. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 42. So it will be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable, and it is raised imperishable. I suppose everybody over 40 knows one fact, and that is things don't, your joints don't work like they used to, your hair begins to fall out, your teeth begin to fall out, and what doesn't fall out begins to fall anyway. So, and so gravity begins to pull you, and begins to pull you apart, and our body begins to wear out. It wears out, and eventually it perishes. And it doesn't matter whether you get a facelift, foot lift, or whatever kind of cosmetic surgery you get, you can't keep the inevitable from happening, which is this human body, no matter what is done to it, eventually perishes. But that is not what the resurrection body will do. The resurrected body will be raised imperishable, so it will not be subject to the things that aging and disease and viruses and all of the things that we face today. So it is immortal, but immortality is not much good if it's not imperishable as well, right? Because who would want to live forever, decaying forever? I think those are like, the kids were asked, we were passing a swamp yesterday, Geneva Swamp, and I was trying to explain it wasn't a lake, it was a swamp, and the question was, do monsters live in the swamp? So, when you think about things that live forever but aren't, that perish, that's what you think about. You think about monsters. Well, God has told us that our bodies are not only going to be immortal, but they're not going to be in a state of perishing. They're going to be imperishable. And so, that's important to us. The fourth thing here is that our bodies are going to be spiritual. Now 1 Corinthians 15:44 says, it is sown a natural body. When it's put into the ground or cremated or whatever happens to the body, it is natural. It's connected to this world, but it is raised a spiritual body. Now, I want you to understand something. When the Bible uses the term spiritual, it does not mean that it's immaterial. Okay? There's a difference. Spiritual things are real, but they can't be seen. And yet we know from Jesus' body, and we'll see this in a few moments, that Jesus was able to seamlessly, as it were, go between the unseen world and the seen world. And we know that because he could appear in a room that was locked, right? He wasn't there. He wasn't in the upper room. The disciples were having some supper there, and they were eating, and all of a sudden, with the doors locked, Jesus appeared to them, and we also know he disappeared. Now, for those of you who are Star Trek fans, that's the way I kind of look at it. But I come to understand that what it means is that our spiritual body that God promises to us is going to have the capacity to transcend the physical world. It's going to have the ability, we're going to see, to be connected to a physical world and yet transcend that world at the same time. It's neat, but we need to understand this. When we talk about spiritual, we use the term spiritual, we tend to think of spiritual just as being unseen, and that's true, but it is